So, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's Accounting Alchemy Network Lyceum. Very excited to have a special guest with us, Jannette Anderson. She's a business development expert who specializes in working with maturepreneurs. And today's topic will be focused on unconscious ageism and what we need to consider around this area to create more humane, diverse, and inclusive workplaces and businesses for humans of all ages. And before we dive into today's chat with Jannette, just wanted to do a little introduction of myself and also Accounting Alchemy Network in case this is your first time joining us. And I'm Alina Nikishina, and I'm one of the co-leaders of Accounting Alchemy Network. And the Accounting Alchemy Network is a grassroots movement where we are working to turn the accounting profession into a vehicle for positive change in the world. And we're shifting away from just accounting for things like money and profits and into really focusing on how we can account for things that we want to be accountable to in our lives and how accounting professionals can be a big part of creating the change that we want to see in the world. Yeah, so in order to support our community members with this goal, we bring in paradigm shifting perspectives from professionals that and business owners that inspire us to do things differently. And so, with that said, I am excited to get into today's conversation with Jannette about unconscious ageism and creating humane workplaces and businesses for humans of all ages. So, welcome, Jannette. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
being here.
Thank you. Thank you. Like I said before we started, I think it is so cool that you are doing this context and consciousness expansion work in an industry that leads how people do business or certainly influences it. So I think it's really great work.
Yeah, well, thank you for being a part of it. So, yeah, let's see. So, to start, just tell us a little bit about yourself and what inspired you to work with maturepreneurs and talking about ageism.
Well, I think I came out of the womb with a briefcase. I'm pretty sure I was born entrepreneurial. And I had my first business when I was 5 because I wanted to buy a book. So I had a garage sale, even though it was not sanctioned by my mother, and made enough money to buy the book that I wanted. But when mom came home, she wasn't all that inspired about my success rate. And so I got spanked. She took my money. I had to go back and buy back all the stuff I could because she didn't know I was doing that. And many people would say that's not a very successful first venture, but I learned a couple of very important lessons. One is um, you can take your destiny into your own hands by being an entrepreneur. And the other is don't go into business with family. Um, I'm semi sort of kidding, but not really. That was my first business. My second business was a franchise when I was 7. I had a lemonade stand on one corner, and there was 3 other really busy corners, and they couldn't get to me. I couldn't get to them. So I co-opted 3 of my friends. I went and got the other 3 free TV trays out of the set, made signs, gave them lemonade, and we split the money. They got 50% for selling it, and I got 50% for um, creating the product. So entrepreneurialism runs in my blood, and I think it is a really valuable way for people to not only contribute in terms of what we create or produce, but to live into our purpose, to that as a vehicle for living into our why we do what we do. I'm a big proponent of figuring out what your why is and using that to differentiate you in the marketplace. So for the past 40 plus years, I have been, it is actually plus quite a bit now. When I stop and do the math, I get a little boggled. I have been helping entrepreneurs to grow their business. And the other half of my life is about 38 years of personal growth, facilitation, and facilitating coaching certification programs. So really my fascination and my specialty is getting the 4 inches between your ears working so the business can work. So I've been doing this for a long time, and I love supporting entrepreneurs. Now, as we shift, often our demographic shifts. And so I was on the marketers cruise in 2020. So to answer your question about how this part came about, I had been supporting women for a decade prior to that, because I think that we were really being called to shift how we do business, and consequently society. I think that's why women were being called to step up more, is to really truly partner with men, which I don't think we have been effectively and efficiently, and to really shift how we think about business. And in 2020, I was on the marketers cruise. I was at something called Pizza and Profits. It's networking late at night. And I was talking to a group of people, and someone asked what I did. I was mid sentence answering him. He turns and started talking to someone else. I'm like, huh, well, what a dick. So I politely excused myself and went to another group. And the exact same thing happened. I was like, okay, they can't all be jerks. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm not showing up. It's like, no, no, that's not it. I have blue hair and I have often polka dot glasses, and I'm large and in charge in most situations. And so that wasn't it. I wasn't turning down my light. I was present. So it's like, okay, what can it be? What's going on here? And I got curious and started to observe every woman on that cruise with gray hair that was in our group of 450, was completely ignored and actually invisible, like not seen. I was at a table of 8 for dinner, and there was 2 older ladies at the other end. Everyone talked to everyone except them. No one talked to them. And at one point, midway through the meal, I kind of yelled down and said, "Hey, how are you two?" The 2 people sitting across from them literally went, "Oh." They were surprised that there was people there. They did not actually register them. So that was enough for me to go, oh, no, 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 no. I will not be, nor will I let anybody else be invisible simply because of how old we are, or that we may have gray hair, or whatever the case may be. So I started to get really fascinated about the topic and look at what was going on, and recognize that there are 4 major global trends going on right now that everyone in business needs to know about, and very few do. And that's what I'm here to bring awareness about, is how those impact business, the world, and our society. And so that's how I came to be interested in maturepreneurs. It's a long-winded
Wow.
story, but it gives you
Yeah.
some context.
Well, thank you for sharing. Well, I want to know what those trends are. And also, I mean, I was going to ask you about just how do you define unconscious ageism? I mean, you were kind of already explaining, your own personal experience of feeling like,
Right. Well, and I
someone
and I
knew.
have actually a definition here that I do think fits it, and it's in an article that I'll share later with a bunch of resources. But it's basically our failure to be rational and logical is a result of unconscious bias, and it is used because these biases happen without us even knowing about them, and they're automatic and occur in a split second. And there's a lot of them, way more than we think of, right? Like this article just outlines 26 of them, and most of them apply to most of us. We grow up with things in our culture, in our family, in our religion, in our society that impacts what we believe and how we believe it. If you're an American, you're typically either a Republican or a Democrat, and your whole family has been, and therefore you are. That's an unconscious bias. There's a lot of prejudices that come out of the not really stopping to think about what we believe. And like most beliefs, they're installed when we're very young, and they go into the realm of just, that's just the truth. And because we hear those things in our voice, we think there are beliefs, but they aren't. They're actually other people's beliefs and attitudes and so forth that get installed in us. We don't come in prejudiced. We don't come in, thinking that people who are fat are wrong. That gets instilled in us. And often when we're very young. So I think it's fascinating and wonderful that the people watching this and listening to this are willing to at least look at and consider, I have some unconscious biases and I don't want them to be unconscious. So let me take a look at this.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk a lot in Accounting Alchemy about unconscious bias. So far, we've been talking about it through social justice, so like racism. Um, and yeah, I think it'd be really cool to talk about ageism also. So, can you give us some examples, some additional examples of how ageism shows up in like business or workplaces?
Sure. Lots of different ways. And, um, I think what I want to say is that the two isms that are still fairly um, off the radar and, in fact, often condoned are sizeism and ageism. Sizeism is one that's really quite big. Sizeism, looksism, that is really quite big. And there's tons of studies about biases in social justice, biases in hiring practices, biases in promotion practices for people who look good, i.e., are attractive or are the right size. Right size being not too skinny, not too fat. And I've kind of been the not to co-opt this from sizeism, but it's an example of how this happens in some subtle and not so subtle ways. There, many years ago, I was doing a proposal with a partner of mine to do some sales training for an accounting firm, actually, MNP in Canada. And the vice president of sales told my partner that they wouldn't hire me. She could present and teach. They wouldn't hire me because I was too fat. This came from, and literally verbatim, that's what he said. And I was incredible to teach his sales force because of that. The irony of it, not only was it blatant prejudice, but the irony of it was that he was 300 pounds himself and 5'4". So wider than he was tall. But it was okay for him, but it wasn't okay. So there was both sexism and sizeism at play. So there are things that we assume and judge, again, consciously or unconsciously, even though we may have that ourselves or be that ourselves. And so older people often have ageism as a bias themselves. Inner ageism goes on a lot. We have all sorts of assumptions about our limitations and who we should be and how we should be as we age. Tons and tons of them. And an example of how that plays out in the workplace, I have a person who is partnering with me on the conference here in Calgary, highly competent woman, highly trained and skilled in very relevant skills right now, like change management and so forth. Lots of credentials, lots of expertise, lots of relevant experience. She has put out over 300 resumes and gone on 27 interviews. Totally appropriate for the roles, interviews well, highly capable. In 27 interviews, she hasn't been hired. She's 62. You can't tell me out of 27 interviews that someone who's highly valued, that's not a result of ageism, because all other factors are equal. And so it still happens. Now, they don't say that, they just don't hire her.
Yeah.
And
What do you think is the barrier? Or like, what do you think is going through these people's minds that are making these hiring decisions?
that's a great question. I'm just going to try and close down a few things because my internet is jumpy. I don't know if yours is. The unconscious biases that go with ageism. The person that they're hiring who is more experienced and older will want to get paid more than someone who's younger. Of course, they bring more value to the table, but for companies that are cost conscious, that's one consideration. There's an assumption that they will be sick, that they're going to have to pay out more for these people because they're going to be using social services and EAP programs up and so forth, which is actually not based in fact or statistics. If you look at it, in fact, the millennials and Gen X's, or sorry, Gen Z's will actually miss more time and have more time off work than boomers do consistently. So it's not based in any kind of fact. The other assumption in and projection is that they are not tech savvy. And the reality is, there are many young people who are not tech savvy, middle managers who are not tech savvy, or middle aged people, and some older people are not, but many are, especially if they've been in the workforce for the last little while. So there's just this assumption that if you're young, you're tech savvy, and if you're old, you're not. Neither are true. And by the way, ageism affects both ends of the spectrum. A lot of times we won't hire young people because we don't think they're grounded enough or wise enough or whatever. That's ageism equally as much as not hiring someone because we don't think they'll be able to keep up with the pace. It's just not the truth of the person in front of you. It's a generalized stereotype, and all generalized stereotypes are not necessarily the truth of the person in front of you. So there's economic reasons, there's bias reasons in terms of fear of missing work, etc., and there is the technology consideration and concern, and pace. Can they keep the pace? Most organizations have people doing 2 or 3 jobs because of economic, COVID and all of the economic ripples. And will this person want to take on that much work, etc. In many cases, boomers, because of work ethic and how we grew up and how we work, will work circles around younger counterparts. But again, that's not seen in that general dismissive bias.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. Um, I'm curious from your perspective, what would it look like to have more age diverse workplaces or like businesses where all people of all ages are valued? What do you see as like the main benefits to
Oh,
having?
there's really big and practical benefits that, again, people are not paying attention to. The first one is there's what they call the happiness you. People are happiest when we're very young and when we're older. Happiest, most content with ourselves, least stressed out. And so when older people come into workplaces, whether it's big or small businesses, they tend to immediately, and this is statistically, they've done studies on this, positively impact morale. Because they are happier, they're less stressed out, they make better bosses in many cases, and or just generally make the workplace more pleasant. And that helps a lot with retention, with attraction, with productivity. And yet companies don't recognize that. If you hire someone between 30 and 55, you are guaranteed to be hiring someone who is stressed out, who is probably exhausted, who is juggling multiple things, family, et cetera, et cetera. And they tend to have less positive impact on the culture in terms of happiness and so forth. So happier workplaces is one thing. Secondly, I think the we lose track of how innovation really works. Innovation is a combination of starting with a blank slate, which is what younger people with less experience bring. So hire younger people who don't have preconceived notions, who think in terms of what's possible, who are visionaries, who have that blank slate without all the preconceived notions and constraints that come with experience, etc. But that alone can create innovation through trial and error, which can be very time consuming and money consuming. What boomers and Gen Xers to innovation is context. So experience, but and not that they're choosing from the past, but they are using the past to inform some things that make sense now. So it's not a case of, oh, well, we tried that in 1982 and it didn't work, so let's not try it again. It's more a case of, okay, well, based on human nature and lots of experience, here's what works with this. Why don't we try this first? And bringing that together with that blank slate creates a really balanced and powerful approach to innovation. It doesn't work if either piece is missing. So we need younger and older to come together to really accelerate innovation. If people want innovation, it's not typically doesn't come from that middle tier where people are stuck in the what they're doing right now and tend to have a more limited perspective. Not all, of course, this is another stereotype, but in general. The other thing that they bring is groundedness. So they have a work ethic, they tend to be more patient, they tend to be wiser. And when I say tend, there's lots of wise young people and stupid old people. So, it's not a given that just because you're old, you're wise. However, they do have the advantage of experience and expertise, a lot of life lessons. So they tend to be more well rounded in terms of dealing with human nature, in terms of having had experience with things and being more grounded in humanity. So they bring more of that humanity to the workplace. They bring their whole selves. We tend to, as we grow older, compartmentalize ourselves a lot. I'm this way here at work and I'm that way in the family. As we get older, we recognize that that's BS and arbitrary, and we bring all of who we are to what we do all the time. And that groundedness tends to provide permission for others to be all of who they are, and it tends to provide a much safer space for many people. So now, and that's just aside from the experience and expertise that they bring, which can really elevate and accelerate results. Yes, you can get a cheaper resource. Will they be as productive and powerful and contributory as quickly? How long will the learning curve be? It really is a balance of what is going to actually create that bottom line contribution the fastest. And in many cases, it's not the cheapest person or resource. So
Mm.
those are some of the things they contribute. And the other thing is, boomers and Gen Xers tend to be lifelong learners. So they bring a real appreciation for learning to an environment where often, traditionally, generationally, millennials tend to change jobs every 2 years, 2.5 years. They get bored, they move on. That's how they learn. They learn through change, right? We learn through more structured growth. Neither is wrong, but for a company's continuity, having someone committed to growth within the current environment can support less turnover to get that same growth. So that's another benefit and advantage. Obviously, I think we rock.
Yeah,
I am biased.
I hear
100%.
that. No, that's great for being an advocate for yeah, absolutely. Because I was gonna say, what are employers or business owners, people in the hiring world, like, or even when we're hiring for our own businesses, right? Services and stuff like that. Like, what are people currently looking at? And I mean, it sounds like money is a big factor.
Yep. Big factor, and their biases that we will, end up not being able to work for a long time. The irony is they want retention, and boomers will be working. It used to be in our world that you retired at 65 and you died at 75. But that is so pre 1950. That hasn't been the reality for a long time. And the current reality is that there are more 100-year-olds on the planet now than cumulatively in history. And we are living and working 20, 30, 40 years beyond retirement, both because we have to and because we choose to. And I'll talk about that in the trends, but they will be with your company in all likelihood anywhere from 5 to 20 years, even if you're hiring them at 55 or 60. The millennial, the Gen Z, they won't, most of them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're looking for longevity, that's where you should be looking, not thinking that they're going to, get bored and tired and want to go golf and knit, because they're not. That's not the reality of what's happening.
Right. So you were mentioning the trends. Is that what you were referring to in the beginning? Because I'd
Yeah.
love, it might be a good segue into that.
So the four trends, and this is for those of you who are financial advisors, accountants, business consultants, whatever you may be, this is so important to recognize and let your clients know about this, because no one is taking advantage of what I call the perfect storm of opportunity. In the Great Depression, more millionaires were created than any other time in history before that, because people were going to where there was the opportunity. Right now, what most people don't know is that 65% of Canadians and between 50 and 90% of Americans, and it's similar around the world, 60 to 70%, and 50 to 90%, depending on where you are geographically in the US and the demographic band you're looking at. About 65% of the population cannot afford to retire. What that means is they're anywhere from food and housing insecurity to can't quite take those vacations we wanted to, or have to downsize the house, and somewhere in between, but they have to continue to earn. They cannot support themselves at their current level of income. 65%. And yet they're not being supported, marketed to, advertised, served. They are overlooked because the assumption is you hit 65, you're off golfing and knitting for the rest of your life. Only about 20% of the population is actually retired, like golfing and knitting for the rest of their lives. The other 80% of us have side hustles, are creating nonprofits, creating large global enterprises. So there's a huge percent of the population, and I actually call it a poverty epidemic, that have to continue to work. Otherwise, they will be in not great situations. I think it's just a side of criminal that that's not being addressed by governments and by the society, etc. That's a huge population. Let me tell you, if it was them, if it was 40-year-olds, they'd be taking a look at that real quick. The second trend that I think is really important that's going on is more entrepreneurs are coming into the business world right now than any other time in history ever, because of the just under a billion boomers and Gen Xers that have to continue working and or choose to, and what I call the tail end of the COVID refugees. So the people who left their business or their corporate careers and started businesses. That's still happening a bit, and that great resignation, etc. But right now, more entrepreneurs than ever in history. And again, very few people addressing that huge wave that's coming in and needs services and support. The third trend is what I call the loneliness epidemic. Well, I don't call it that. There's a loneliness epidemic, but how I think this relates is especially entrepreneurs who are solopreneurs and or work in small businesses, and older people tend to be more prone to isolation. 1 in 4 North Americans say that loneliness is impacting their mental health. That's 25% of the population, and I think that's probably underreported. And a good percentage of those are older people and entrepreneurs, bring them together even more so. So we need community. It is extraordinarily hard to find communities, events, activities, groups for maturepreneurs, for this entrepreneurial demographic. It doesn't exist. You can join regular entrepreneurial cohorts and groups and so forth and so on, but they don't address any of the specific and special issues that we have. And again, you tend to be unconsciously age biased in those groups and not, seen or profiled or have the same kind of impact. So there's a lot of people who need community and very few communities, especially for this group, that exist. The fourth trend that's going on right now, that's once in a century or once in a point in history, is that there's more wealth. So conversely, we've got a poverty epidemic, and more wealth is in the hands of boomers right now than any generation ever in history. 79.5% in North America is in the hands of boomers and Gen Xers, and is transferring to Gen X and millennials. What that means is that there is a huge amount of buying power. And again, very few people are targeting them. When you look at commercials, what do you see? Depends, Viagra, life insurance, stair lifts, seniors' homes. That's for that small percentage of the population that is not, that has lots of services and support, I call it, not very kindly, the D&D market, the decline and decrepitude market. But for the rest of us that choose to continue to contribute, that choose to continue to make a difference, um, and or have to, nothing targeting us, no events, no et cetera, et cetera. So that's why I'm creating the Maturepreneur World. In terms of economics, companies and services that recognize this trend, this demographic, will be ahead of the curve, will be ahead of that tsunami, the silver tsunami or the gray wave, whatever you want to call it. It boggles my mind that we are not a target market on the radar of major banks and insurance companies and financial investment companies, etc. Because again, they think we're done. I'm like, oh no, just getting going. So it is a huge opportunity for people.
Yeah.
And uh, just two other quick stats: people who have purpose and meaning in their life at any point, but especially older, tend to live 7 years longer than those that don't, and 7 qualitative years, happier, healthier. Conversely, those that are lonely and isolated live 8 years less. And the World Health Organization equates it to smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of its physical impact on you. So when you put those two together, helping this demographic have purposeful contribution, being seen, being valued, not being invisible, being put to work, having a way to make a difference is not only critical for society and our well-being and our healthcare system, but it just makes good sense to have a whole lot of people happier, healthier, and making the difference that really only they can make. So that's my rant about the four trends. And I think really, truly, the question to be asking your clients, if you want to help them make money, is how can they take advantage of the convergence of those four trends at this unique time in history for repositioning their products and services, for checking if they're actually having conversations in their marketing with that demographic, for taking a look at what new things could be developed in terms of products or services. It's just under 1 billion people globally and trillions of dollars in the hands of those people in the US. Um, to miss that is just dumb. Dumb.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. I mean, to me, it sounds like it's not only an opportunity for more flourishing business for all, which we're definitely about. I mean, you need money to have a successful business and to live in this world. So, and at the same time, it's an opportunity to have a more flourishing way of living for people of all ages, like you were saying, right? So to start recognizing the benefits and the pros of like what does each generation bring as far as gifts versus looking at, oh, they don't have this or they don't have that, just making assumptions based on a blanket statement. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think it's a win-win for on so many fronts.
Well, and I want to speak to you from the point of view of self-preservation as well, because human beings, we pretty much want to know what's in it for us. And so being aware of prejudices is great, and that makes us better human beings. But really, truly, I want to appeal to your self-interest. If you are not yet in this demographic, hopefully you will be someday. And you don't want to deal with the same BS that we have to. You don't want to have to go to a bank to start a new venture and be told that no, you can't have a loan because you're 60, or try and get business insurance at 72 and not be able to get it, or any of the other kinds of barriers that are very, very challenging and tactical, um, simply because of how old you are. So it's important to address this now. What people don't realize is this is an ongoing permanent change. People being born right now are supposedly going to live to 130. That makes 65 at best middle age, right? So we really need to shift how we think about retirement, about what we're doing economically with our life. The model of save up and then quit is just not functional when we live 100 years. So how do we stay vital and healthy? There's a lady here in Calgary, where I am, Calgary, Alberta, Canada, Marjorie Zingle, who started a data center when she was 69, just because there was an opportunity. And so she didn't know anything about it. She bought the center and turned it around, is the only woman running one in North America, and has been very successful with it. She's now 89 and she is expanding. She took on 20,000 additional square feet, had a hell of a time getting the approval and the financing, even though she's got 20 years of history, even though she has a successful business, and is starting her new tech business, which, by the way, her previous tech business won an award. And she won top 7 over 70 or something like that. So she's starting a new tech business. That's going to be more of the norm. There are so many stories like that are not just the outliers. Currently, at that level, that might be a bit of an outlier story, but it's not unusual and it will get more and more common. So we really need to shift how we think.
Yeah. Well, so that's a good segue to my next question. And, how can we begin to become more conscious of our unconscious biases towards age, that we may personally have?
That's also a brilliant question. And I think good questions are more powerful than good answers. So part of it is just to stop and say, what do I actually believe about that? You know, um, and to out ourselves, to be honest. I was in a Walmart in Florida during the pandemic, and there was African American family, big, huge family running around, no mask, no whatever, 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 and the kid was literally licking um, poles and shelves, and like, I don't know why, he might have had an iron deficiency or something, but anyways, literally licking stuff at a time when we're being told to uh, mask up, be careful, germ, et cetera, et cetera. uh, and I noticed my already my always talking voice that was saying um, that is because they are a poor Black family. They don't have the same kinds of awareness and or education. And I stopped myself and went, A, how do you know that that's the case? B, is that true? C, does it serve to have that perspective or position? Because even if it is quote unquote true, is it necessarily true in this situation? So just catching myself with that prejudice. And I was very dismayed that I had that, because I like to think I'm not prejudiced. We all do, and we all are. And so catching it and questioning it is one of the most brilliant things you can do, and the most compassionate for other people and for yourself, because none of us likes to be a jerk. None of us likes to be prejudiced or unthinking or uncompassionate. We like to think we're good people. So really calling into question, what do I believe? There's a lady called Byron Katie who does something called The Work. And it's basically a personal growth worksheet on one page. And it's really good to apply to beliefs, any belief you may have. Beliefs about money, beliefs about people, beliefs about situations. And it's 4 questions and a turnaround. And it just helps you be more forensic in your thinking, more critical in your thinking. The first question is it true? Whatever the assumption or the statement or the belief is. The second question is, can I absolutely know it's true? The third question is something like, who am I being when I hold that belief? And the fourth question is, what if I didn't hold that belief? Who would I be? Roughly paraphrased. And then you do a turnaround. You tell a whole bunch of other stories, because all of these are just stories that we're making up. They're not the reality. They're just a story we make up about something that we engage with based on the past. And so then you turn it around and tell different stories, and then pick a different, more empowering, more effective story based on who you want to be in the world. So that's the inner work of it. Some of the other things that you can do, I'll provide a whole bunch of resources, including an article on unconscious bias. Even just like I went through the list and I went, yep, yep, yep. Oh, no, not so much that one, but yep, yep, no, yep, 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 yep. Like about 20 out of the 26 operate on an ongoing basis within me. Um, so being aware of where those blind spots are so that we're more likely to catch it. The other thing I would encourage is enroll people in your environment, your workplace, your family, your partner, in having conversations about it, but also really catching you, supporting you by catching you when the bias comes out in your language, because it gets into reality when we speak it. Because how we think and believe leads to the actions that we take, which leads to the results that we create. So having an intervention on that when it's starting to become part of the actions, so our language, how we behave, when we have other people, when we ask them to support us in being aware of those unconscious things, it can really help. We can't see what we can't see. It's like, trying to see the label on the pickle jar when you're inside the jar. You can't see it. So have other people give you feedback, enroll them in supporting you in that.
Yeah,
Those
thank you. Yeah, as soon as you were starting to share the first part, I was just thinking about it from like a business perspective and workplace perspective. Like having accountability from somebody to help you make hiring decisions or um yeah, either into the company or like if you're going to hire someone for services or products or
are,
whatever. How can it be somebody other than just you?
yeah,
um
and to be aware, like there's in this article, there's some stuff about hiring practices and how this organization has people they make microloans based on submissions from thousands and thousands of people, and they have them give them a picture. People who are lighter skinned and more attractive get microloans at a significantly higher level than other people. So take that out of the equation. Don't make that part of the process. Don't see them until you look at resumes without the assumption. And by the way, you'll still have bias. You'll see someone's name that's an ethnic name, and you'll assume that person is whatever they are. But it will help if it's not based on visuals initially.
Yeah, that's interesting. Somebody was telling me to take my college off my resume and stuff like that. Just curious.
Yeah,
'Cause-
it can create biases as well, depending on, you know, there's confirmation bias. All people from Harvard are super super smart. All people from Brown College are from a particular culture. No, and even if that is the case, how about this person, this situation right here?
right.
Right. So, is it easy to get into Harvard? No. Does that necessarily mean that person has the kind of intelligence you want to need and that everybody is successful in Harvard? No.
No.
Right. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it's so insidious and sneaky, and it can get to feel, like I think there's sometimes this backlash against political correctness because we feel like, oh my God, I can't just be human. And it's not that. It's not that you're bad or wrong if you've got biases. We all have biases. That's part of being a human being. We're subjective. There's not a human being alive that is objective all the time. So great. Embrace it, learn about it, figure out which ones you want, which ones you don't, and then go from there.
Yeah. Like you said, being honest with ourselves and taking responsibility as versus just saying like, oh, that's how it always has been or how it always will be. I mean, it's pretty clear from what you've shared. I mean, you've shared so many amazing trends that things are already not as they seem and they're changing even more going forward.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm curious, what advice, I don't know, would you have for professionals who might have experienced age discrimination
Great.
or business owners?
Okay. I would have the same advice. Now, I want to preface this with, and I hope I'm not out of line by swearing it, but I tend to be a shit disturber anyways. So, and have always been, which is why I tend not to do well in corporate. I have done my time in the corporate trenches and usually can only manage 2 to 2.5 years before I go, no, 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 too much politics and BS and bureaucracy, oh my, and go back and start my company. Um, so I'm not the best person to ask about how to be effective in corporations. However, that said, I think that one of the things that we need to do with any prejudice is call it out, is to acknowledge it, make it, bring it out of the shadows where it hides into the light, but to do that with as much compassion as possible. People truly are doing the best they can with what they know. That person who is judging is doing so because that's what they learned. That's what they were told is the right way to be. That's what their experience has reinforced for them. Doesn't mean that they're necessarily a bad person. It means that they're operating from some biases and they're just trying to get their needs met, like you and I. And as much as we may think that they are, wrong, bad, terrible, awful people, we need to look at the behavior, not our preconceived notion about them. We don't want to, react with bias to bias. We want to get to a neutral space and with as much compassion as possible for them and us, call it out and say, something like, I'm curious, that sounds like it might be an age bias. I'm wondering if you have any policies around age hiring practices. Or so make it about the policy, not the person. Make it about the facts, not the story. And that's part of creating a safe place for having difficult conversations. So here's what happened, not you meant this or you thought this. So if Nelda was in a situation, the lady I was telling you about, and someone said, well, no, we don't think you're right for this job, she could simply say, I'm curious, what is the criteria for your selection? What is it about how I presented that may not fit for you? So delve a little deeper. Don't be afraid to ask the questions and don't be afraid to say, in my experience, so being accountable in our language, I, not you, have experienced this. And for me, that strikes me as ageism. I wonder if that might be at play here. I wonder what might be going on. Or is it purely a matter of something that I did personally? I would really appreciate your feedback. So call it out. When you see it, call it out. And if you are observing it in a client or in a coworker and a manager, approach it from the perspective of self-interest. Like, hey, Bill, I noticed that you give, I don't know, the older people in our company less time in meetings to talk. Or something that is documentable, right? That you can actually point to. I'm curious what that might be about. And I also would like to encourage that we provide some kind of system or process for everyone to get equal airtime. Or I'm, curious what might be behind that. Can we have a check conversation around it? So call it out. And that's scary because we're confronting what we consider to be authority. There is a bias where we want to belong, basically. We want, and groups conform to one another. And that can create the kind of mob mentality that keeps prejudices in place. So be willing to call it out yourself. Be willing to be an advocate when you see that around you. Teach your kids, watch your own language for your own biases, because that's really where it starts, is within us. And if you are, someone who cares about this in any capacity, be an advocate, write articles, go to meetings, get more aware, be active. There's a great blog called Yo, Is This Ageist by Ashton Applewhite, who I'll tell you about her book and stuff in a minute. But even just checking in on things like that, because people will put up situations and conversations there and say, hey, is this ageist? because it so permeates our culture. Even
Mhm.
something as simple as giving people birthday cards that are, kind of ageist around, oh, you are, all the candles are burning down the house kind of thing. Um, that kind of thing can be very subtle. Or something as simple as, wow, you look good for your age. What does that mean? Right? Um, how am I supposed to look at my age? And what does good for my age mean? So, how about just, wow, you look really good today, period. Okay. That's an example of a very subtle, conscious one or frequent one.
Love that. Yeah, thank you. And you mentioned some resources. What resources would you recommend to folks who are
Oh, so
interested?
many. Okay, I'm gonna put a bunch into the chat, and what I decided, because I have a lot of them, what I'll do is I'll just put them into an email and send them to Alina so that she can
Yeah.
send out links if you want, to people. But one of the books I highly recommend is Ashton Applewhite's um, book, This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism. It's intelligent, it's thought provoking, it's really amazing in terms of uh, uncovering a whole bunch of things that I had never thought about before, but that were really impactful. So, This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism. She also hosts something called oldschool.info, I believe, which is a really good resource clearinghouse, oldschool.info, with tools and reports and papers and campaigns and videos and talks and so forth, um, in the realm of ageism. So she is also, and they do office hours once a week, I think from 1:30 to 2:30 Mountain. So free to join. Fascinating people on there doing all sorts of interesting things, but great conversations too around awareness, around physical limitations, and just all sorts of subtle things that impact both the workplace and non-working. There's also this book, I'm Still Not Done, by Patty Temple Rocks, about ageism in the workplace specifically. So another good resource. Yo, Is This Ageist, the blog. And the article that I'm going to recommend is, let me just grab the link for you. It's helpfulprofessor.com, unconscious bias examples. It's just a really good overview of all the myriad kinds of unconscious biases that we have, including ageism. So those are some that will support you. There's tons of organizations about ageism, tons about retirement, but not a lot that is targeting the area that I'm targeting, which is those who are refiring, not retiring. So one of the other resources that you can do is go to maturepreneur.world. I have a community, a network for those who are 55 plus and hashtag not done by a long shot, and who are either considering their next leap, so maybe getting going or creating their next, adventure, or keeping going, have been in business for a while and are looking for how to, overcome being tired and how to renew our enthusiasm or our sense of purpose, or what is purpose now, that kind of thing. So for those of you who are getting going or keeping going on your next grand adventure, the Maturepreneur Network is a really cost-effective way for you to come into community and be supported and seen for the difference that you're working on making. And we're hosting a conference, the first of its kind, as far as I can find, in the world, that is for those who are refiring, not retiring. So, for those who are looking to reinvent and reignite rather than just go away.
Yeah.
So,
And that's in Canada,
that's
right?
happening next. Yeah, it's live in Canada and virtual, so you can attend from anywhere. And I would love, we're looking for sponsors and vendors and speakers and attendees. Oh my! So we really, it's a big market. It's just not gathered anywhere. So that's
Yeah.
what I'm doing, is bringing us together so we have a voice, that we're seen and that we're valued.
Fabulous. Thank you for sharing those resources. We'll for sure share them in our networks. And before we kind of wrap up,
Mm-hmm.
what's maybe one piece of advice or a key takeaway that you'd like the listeners to walk away with today?
Okay, I'm going to say two things. One is um, we never know what's going on in the hearts and minds of other people. So err on the side of benefit of the doubt. It's just a kinder, gentler way to be, and it'll make it kinder and gentler with yourself. So, benefit of the doubt. And the second thing I would say is um, we are never done as long as we're on this side of the dirt. So, keep dreaming, keep saying yes, keep living a yes life, no matter what. And all the more important when we need to change a world of no's into some yeses so that people can be and do and have what they want and not be disadvantaged by prejudices and stereotypes. So basically, keep kicking ass and taking names unapologetically. Be you so that you can be the difference that only you can be at any age.
Mm, thank you. Yeah. And if people want to connect with you, I know you mentioned the Maturepreneur World website, but is there any other way that people could connect with you if they want to learn more about your work or what you're
Yeah, you can
creating in the world?
connect with me on LinkedIn, and I have a Facebook community called the Maturepreneur World that you're welcome to join. Reach out to me there too. The website maturepreneur.world. And Jannette at bodacity.ca, JANNETTE at Bodacity, BODACITY, which is not, it's real world, means bold and audacious together. And you can connect and listen to the Maturepreneur podcast as well. For those who are too inspired to retire, that's available for you as well as a resource.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being here today and for bringing awareness to this really important topic. Definitely opened my eyes to some trends and just opportunities and things that I think a lot of us are not even aware of. So thank
Yeah,
you.
I think the conversation is so important. So don't be afraid to like pop into the Maturepreneur World and ask questions, or go to old school and ask questions. Um, we don't. There's a great book that I was reading called White Fragility that is really about how unaware we are about racism and so forth. And I've often asked people awkward, uncomfortable questions, things that I should know better about, but don't. Better to ask and learn than to remain in ignorance. So, yeah, ask lots of questions.
Thank you. Absolutely. All right, Jannette and everybody, thank you for tuning in today. And until next time.